In the vast darkness between stars, legends whisper of a species that refused to kneel. When the Galactic Empire crushed 1,000 civilizations under its iron heel, one world vanished without a trace. For 3 centuries, that world was forgotten, dismissed as another conquered dust ball in the Empire's endless expansion. But empires built on fear have a fatal flaw. They create enemies in the shadows. Now, as the Empire's greatest fleet faces rebellion on 12 fronts, as alien warlords tear apart the Outer Rim, and as the Emperor's grip weakens with each passing day, something stirs in the void. A ship appears on the edge of known space, bearing no Imperial codes, following no known flight patterns, and responding to no hails. The ship's hull bears scars from battles fought in forgotten wars. Its crew speaks a language the Empire's translators struggle to decipher. And deep in its cargo holds live weapons that shouldn't exist, technology that violates every known law of physics. The Empire is about to learn that some species don't just survive extinction. They evolve beyond recognition, forge themselves into something harder than diamond and more dangerous than a dying star. They're coming home, and they're bringing friends. The bridge of the Imperial dreadnought Eternal Dominion hummed with controlled chaos. Admiral stood before the main tactical display, her 6 arms working frantically across multiple control interfaces, while her compound eyes tracked dozens of data streams simultaneously. The rebellion had spread faster than anyone anticipated, and now 12 star systems were in open revolt against the Galactic Empire. "Status report on the Vega system," she barked, her translator collar converting her chittering dialect into standard Imperial. Commander, a hulking with gray skin like weathered stone, stepped forward. "The rebel fleet has taken control of 3 orbital platforms. Our garrison forces are requesting immediate reinforcement." His mandibles clicked in frustration. The Empire was spread too thin, fighting on too many fronts. What had started as isolated incidents 3 months ago had snowballed into the largest threat to Imperial authority in over 2 centuries. Worse, the rebels seemed to have access to advanced weaponry that their intelligence networks couldn't identify. "Deploy the 8th Battle Group to Vega," she commanded, "and send word to Admiral that we need those reinforcements from the core worlds immediately." "Admiral," called out Lieutenant from the communications station, her blue Aquarian features creased with confusion. "I'm receiving an unusual transmission from the outer perimeter sensors." "Define unusual," replied, not looking up from her tactical assessments. "We have a single vessel approaching from the drift. But, sir, it's not broadcasting any Imperial identification codes, and its energy signature doesn't match anything in our databases." Commander's massive head turned toward the communications station. "Could be another rebel scout ship, permission to dispatch interceptors." "Wait," primary arms froze over her controls. Something about this felt different. In her 40 years of service, she had developed an instinct for danger, and right now every nerve in her exoskeleton was screaming warnings. "Show me the sensor readings." The main display shifted, showing the outer edge of their patrol zone. A single blip moved steadily toward their position, but the accompanying data made no sense. The ship appeared to be roughly 2 kilometers in length, placing it in the heavy cruiser category, but its mass readings were off the charts. The energy output was unlike anything in Imperial records, and strangest of all, it seemed to be leaving some kind of distortion field in its wake. "Run a full spectrum analysis," ordered. "Check for cloaking fields, sensor jammers, anything that might explain these readings." Lieutenant worked frantically at her station, her webbed fingers dancing over the controls. "Admiral, the analysis is complete, but the results are impossible. The ship appears to be composed of materials that shouldn't exist. The hull is showing properties of both organic and metallic compounds fused at a molecular level." "That's impossible," Commander rumbled. "No known species has that kind of technology." Felt a chill run down her spine. She had studied Imperial records extensively during her rise through the ranks. The Empire had conquered over 3,000 species across the galaxy, cataloging their technologies, their weaknesses, their potential threats. Nothing in those vast databases came close to what they were seeing. "How long until it reaches weapons range?" she asked. "Approximately 47 minutes at current speed," replied. "But Admiral, there's something else. I've been monitoring subspace communications, and similar ships have been reported entering Imperial space in at least 6 other sectors." The bridge fell silent except for the soft humming of life support systems. His tactical mind raced through the implications. 7 unknown vessels, all appearing simultaneously at different points along the Empire's borders. This wasn't a coincidence. This was coordinated. "Open a channel to Imperial Command," she ordered. "Priority Alpha clearance." The main screen flickered, and the stern face of Grand Admiral appeared. The ancient, scaled features showed the strain of the ongoing rebellions, but his yellow eyes remained sharp and focused. "Admiral, I trust you have good news about the Vega situation." "Sir, we have a more immediate problem. Unknown vessels are entering Imperial space. The technology they're displaying is beyond anything in our records." His expression darkened. "Explain." Quickly summarized their sensor readings and the reports from other sectors. As she spoke, she watched the Grand Admiral's face grow increasingly grim. "These ships," said slowly, "are they responding to communications?" "We haven't attempted contact yet, sir. Given the current state of the rebellions, we weren't sure if they represented another threat." "Try to establish communication immediately. Use all available frequencies and languages. If these vessels represent a new species, we need to know their intentions." The connection ended, leaving the bridge crew staring at the approaching unknown, turned to her communications officer. "You heard the Grand Admiral. Open all channels." Lieutenant nodded and began broadcasting on every frequency known to Imperial science. Standard greetings in over 100 languages filled the void between the ships. Minutes passed without response. "Admiral," called out the tactical officer, a nervous young named. "The vessel has just crossed into long-range sensor coverage. I'm getting more detailed readings, and they're concerning." "Show me." The display zoomed in on the approaching ship, and gasps echoed across the bridge. The vessel was like nothing they had ever seen. Its hull was a deep charcoal gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface, pulsing with a faint blue energy. Most disturbing of all, sections of the hull appeared to be moving, shifting, and reconfiguring like living tissue. "Are those weapons ports?" Commander asked, pointing to several dark recesses along the ship's flanks. "Unknown," replied, his tentacles quivering with anxiety. "The energy readings are unlike any weapon systems in our database, but Admiral, the power levels are enormous. If those are weapons, they could potentially damage a dreadnought." Felt her blood freeze. The Eternal Dominion was one of the most powerful ships in the Imperial fleet, bristling with enough firepower to reduce a planet to rubble. The idea that an unknown vessel might pose a threat to it was almost incomprehensible. "Charge all weapon systems," she ordered. "Raise shields to maximum and continue trying to establish communication." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, but could sense their growing unease. She didn't blame them. In all her years of service, she had never encountered a situation quite like this. The Empire's strength had always been built on superior technology and overwhelming force. The idea of facing an unknown that might surpass them technologically was terrifying. "Admiral," called out, her voice tight with excitement, "I'm receiving a response." "Put it through the main speakers." Static filled the bridge for a moment, then cleared to reveal a voice speaking in a language that the translation system struggled to process. The words came through in fragments, with long pauses as the computer tried to match syntax and meaning. "Greetings, Imperial vessel. We acknowledge your communications attempts. We request permission to approach for diplomatic purposes." The voice was unmistakably organic, but there was something strange about it. It carried harmonics that suggested the speaker wasn't entirely biological, as if their vocal cords had been augmented or modified somehow. Exchanged glances with Commander. "Respond," she ordered. "Tell them they may approach but slowly and that any aggressive actions will be met with force." Transmitted the message, and they waited. The unknown vessel's response came quickly. "Understood. We appreciate your caution. We have much to discuss regarding the current state of your empire." Something about that last statement made stomach clench. How would an unknown species know about the Empire's current troubles? Unless they had been monitoring Imperial communications for some time, or unless they were somehow connected to the rebellions. "Admiral," reported, "the vessel has reduced speed and is maintaining a respectful distance. But the energy readings are still climbing. Whatever their propulsion system is, it's unlike anything we've seen." studied the tactical display. The unknown ship was now close enough for visual confirmation, and what she saw challenged everything she thought she knew about spacecraft design. The vessel appeared to be growing, sections of its hull expanding and reconfiguring as she watched. It was as if the ship were a living organism adapting to its environment. Establish a visual communication link. I want to see who we're dealing with. The lieutenant worked at her controls, and after a few moments, the main screen filled with an image that made everyone on the bridge take a step backward. The being looking back at them was humanoid in basic structure, but clearly not natural. Its skin had a metallic sheen, with circuit-like patterns glowing beneath the surface. Its eyes were an unsettling electric blue, and when it spoke, they could see that its teeth had been replaced with some kind of crystalline substitutes. "I am commander of the vessel Prometheus Rising," the being said, its voice now coming through clearly as the translation systems adapted. "I represent the Terran Collective, and we have come to discuss the future of this galaxy." The name hit like a physical blow. She knew that designation. Every Imperial officer above the rank of lieutenant knew that designation. It was from the restricted archives, the classified records of the Empire's expansion 3 centuries ago. Terra, the third planet of a small yellow star in what was now designated as Sector 7 Alpha. It had been one of the Empire's easier conquests, a species that had barely achieved interstellar flight. Their resistance had been fierce but ultimately futile. The planet had been sterilized, its population eliminated, and the world itself had been marked as uninhabitable due to radiation contamination. But according to every official record, the Terrans had been extinct for over 300 years. Commander leaned close to and whispered, "Admiral, how is this possible? The Terrans were completely eliminated. I studied the campaign, records myself." Nodded slowly, her mind racing. "Commander," she said, addressing the figure on the screen. "According to our records, Terra was destroyed 3 centuries ago. How do you explain your presence here?" The hybrid being that called itself smiled, an expression that was far from reassuring given his modified features. "Admiral, I think you'll find that reports of humanity's demise were greatly exaggerated. We've spent the last 300 years preparing for this moment. And now, with your empire tearing itself apart from within, it seemed like the perfect time to reintroduce ourselves to galactic society." The implications of those words struck like a plasma bolt. If the Terrans had somehow survived, if they had spent 3 centuries preparing for revenge, and if they were somehow connected to the current rebellions, then the Empire was facing a threat unlike any in its history. "What do you want?" she asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Smile widened, revealing those unsettling crystalline teeth. "What we've always wanted, Admiral, freedom, justice, and an end to the tyranny that has plagued this galaxy for far too long." As if summoned by his words, alarms suddenly began blaring across the bridge. Lieutenant looked up from her station, her aquatic features pale with shock. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from across the fleet. The rebel attacks have just intensified simultaneously across all 12 sectors. And sir, the attacks are being led by ships matching the configuration of the vessel in front of us." Closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of realization settle on her shoulders. The rebellions weren't random uprisings by oppressed species. They were coordinated strikes led by an enemy that the Empire had thought long dead. An enemy that had spent 3 centuries planning their revenge. When she opened her eyes, was still smiling at her from the screen. "Welcome to the revolution, Admiral," he said softly. "We've been waiting a very long time to have this conversation." The emergency council chamber deep within the Imperial Palace on Nexus Prime buzzed with agitated voices as representatives from across the galaxy's major species gathered in crisis session. Emperor himself sat on the crystalline throne at the chamber's head, his ancient form wrapped in the ceremonial robes of absolute power. Despite his imposing presence, the air crackled with barely contained panic. 17 star systems have fallen in the past 6 hours, reported General Vex, the Empire's chief military coordinator. His reptilian features showed the strain of coordinating a war on multiple fronts. "The attacks are perfectly synchronized. These aren't random rebellions anymore. We're facing a coordinated military campaign." Grand Admiral stood before the massive holographic display showing the galaxy's current military situation. Red zones marked rebel-controlled territories, and the pattern was unmistakable. The attacks were methodical, targeting key supply routes and communication hubs while avoiding heavily fortified positions. "Your Majesty," began, his scaled hands gesturing to the display, "we need to discuss the elephant in the room. These human ships that have appeared across our borders are not random coincidence. They're providing tactical support, advanced weaponry, and strategic coordination to the rebel forces." Senator of the Assembly rose from her position, her translucent wings twitching with agitation. "Humans are extinct. We made sure of that 3 centuries ago. Whatever these beings are, they cannot be the same species we eliminated." "Perhaps not," Emperor spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of. "But they claim to be human. They speak the human language. And most concerning of all, they seem to know details about our military capabilities that only extensive intelligence gathering could provide." Admiral stepped forward, having been recalled from her patrol to brief the council personally. "Your Majesty, I've had direct contact with one of their commanders. He claimed to represent something called the Terran Collective. When I mentioned that Terra had been destroyed, he said reports of humanity's demise had been greatly exaggerated." "Show them the technical analysis," General Vex ordered. Activated her personal data pad, and the holographic display shifted to show detailed sensor readings from her encounter with the human ship. The assembled representatives gasped as they saw the impossible readings. "The vessel's hull composition includes materials we don't recognize," explained. "Their energy output exceeds our theoretical maximums. Most disturbing, sections of their ship appear to be organic, capable of self-repair and modification during flight." Ambassador of the Aquarian Consortium leaned forward, his gill slits fluttering with anxiety. "How is such technology possible? Our scientists have been working for centuries to develop adaptive hull technology, and we've barely achieved prototype status." "That's not the worst of it," continued. "Intelligence reports from our agents embedded with the rebel forces indicate that the humans aren't just providing support. They're providing weapons and technology that shouldn't exist. Plasma cannons that can punch through our heaviest armor. Shield generators that operate on completely unknown principles. And worst of all, they seem to have developed some form of advanced artificial intelligence that's helping coordinate rebel activities across vast distances." Emperor rose from his throne, his ancient form towering over the assembly. Despite his age, his presence still commanded absolute attention. 300 years ago, we conquered Terra because its inhabitants posed a potential threat to imperial stability. They were aggressive, innovative, and refused to accept subjugation. We eliminated them to prevent exactly this scenario." "But we did eliminate them," Senator protested. "I've reviewed the historical records myself. Terra was completely sterilized. No life forms survived the bombardment." "Then explain this." Grand Admiral activated another section of the display, showing reports from across the galaxy. "Human forces have appeared in 47 different star systems. They're not just supporting existing rebel groups. They're actively recruiting new ones, providing them with advanced training and equipment." The display zoomed in on specific battle reports. In the Altair system, a single human vessel had disabled 3 Imperial destroyers without sustaining any apparent damage. In the Procyon sector, human ground forces had overwhelmed a heavily fortified garrison using weapons that seemed to adapt their firing patterns in real time. "More concerning," continued, "our attempts to track their movements have failed completely. They appear to have mastered some form of faster-than-light travel that doesn't rely on our hyperspace networks. They can appear and disappear at will, making them nearly impossible to intercept." Minister of Science, an elderly with cybernetic implants covering half his face, cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, I've been analyzing the available data, and I believe I may have an explanation for their apparent survival." All eyes turned to the scientist as he activated his own section of the display. 300 years ago, Terra was indeed sterilized by orbital bombardment. However, we know that humans had achieved limited interstellar travel. It's possible that some population escaped to other worlds before the final attack. "Impossible," Senator argued. "Our surveillance detected no large-scale evacuations." "Not large-scale," agreed. "But humans were known for their distributed infrastructure. Small groups could have escaped to various locations and remained hidden for centuries while developing their technology." Emperor studied the data with calculating eyes. You're suggesting they've spent 300 years preparing for revenge. Exactly. And if that's the case, they've had centuries to study our weaknesses, develop countermeasures to our technology, and plan this campaign down to the smallest detail. The implications of this theory sent a chill through the chamber. The Empire had faced many threats over its long history, but never an enemy that had spent centuries preparing for war while remaining completely hidden. Admiral spoke up again. Your Majesty, during my encounter with their commander, he mentioned something else. He said they represented the Terran collective. The use of collective suggests some form of unified governance or shared consciousness. If they've developed advanced artificial intelligence, they might have capabilities we can't even imagine. What are you suggesting? General Vex asked. I'm suggesting that we're not fighting the same humans we defeated 3 centuries ago. These are something new, something evolved. They've had 300 years to modify themselves, their technology, and their society specifically for the purpose of destroying us. The chamber fell silent as the full weight of this possibility settled over the assembled leaders. They weren't just facing a rebellion. They weren't even facing a war of revenge. They were facing an enemy that had been specifically engineered to be their perfect counter. Emperor returned to his throne, his expression grim. What are their current capabilities? Grand Admiral consulted his data pad. Based on our observations, they have approximately 50 ships that we've been able to confirm. Each one appears to be equivalent to our heavy cruiser class in firepower, but with significantly more advanced defensive capabilities. However, intelligence suggests this might be just the vanguard. What do you mean? The human commander told Admiral that they were bringing friends. Our deep space monitors have detected massive energy signatures moving through the outer rim territories. If our calculations are correct, we could be facing a fleet numbering in the thousands. Senator's wings began beating rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among her species. Thousands of ships with technology superior to ours. That's impossible to defend against with our current resources, especially with the rebellions already straining our forces. Minister leaned forward. Your Majesty, there's another possibility we haven't considered. What if they're not planning to destroy the Empire entirely? Explain. Humans were always pragmatic. If their goal was simple genocide, they could have remained hidden and struck without warning. Instead, they're revealing themselves, coordinating with existing rebel groups, and apparently trying to build a coalition. This suggests they want to change the galaxy's power structure, not simply destroy it. You think they want to replace us? Emperor said slowly. I think they want to build something new, something that includes the species we've conquered but excludes imperial authority. The implications were staggering. If the humans were successfully building a coalition of rebel species, if they were providing advanced technology to anyone willing to fight the Empire, and if they had the military capability to back up their promises, then they could potentially flip the galaxy's entire power structure. Options, the Emperor commanded. General Vex stepped forward. Military option, we concentrate our forces and attempt to eliminate their fleet before they can establish a stronger foothold. Risk, we leave other sectors vulnerable to rebellion. Diplomatic option, Ambassador added. We attempt to negotiate, find out what they actually want and see if we can reach an accommodation. Intelligence option, suggested Minister. We focus on learning more about their capabilities and weaknesses before committing to any course of action. Emperor was quiet for a long moment, his ancient mind weighing possibilities and consequences. Finally, he spoke. We will pursue all 3 options simultaneously. General Vex, prepare our most elite fleets for combat operations, but do not engage unless directly threatened. Ambassador, attempt to establish formal diplomatic contact. Find out what they're really after. Minister, I want full intelligence analysis. How did they survive? Where have they been hiding? What are their true capabilities? And the rebellions? Grand Admiral asked. Continue fighting them, but with new priorities. Focus on defending our most critical infrastructure and communication hubs. We cannot allow the humans to completely isolate our various fleets. As the council began to disperse to implement the Emperor's orders, Admiral approached the throne. Your Majesty, there's one more thing. During my conversation with the human commander, I detected something in his voice patterns, something my experience with interrogation taught me to recognize. Which is, he wasn't just angry about what we did to his people 3 centuries ago. He was excited, eager. Whatever they have planned, they believe they're going to win, and from what I've seen of their technology, they might be right. Emperor stared at the tactical display, still showing the spreading red zones of rebellion across his empire. For the first time in his of rule, he felt something he had almost forgotten, genuine uncertainty about the future. "Then we had better hope our diplomatic efforts are successful," he said quietly. "Because if we cannot find a way to coexist with these evolved humans, we may be witnessing the beginning of the end of the Galactic Empire." As left the chamber, she couldn't shake the memory of unsettling smile. Whatever the humans had become during their 3 centuries in exile, one thing was certain. They were no longer the same species the Empire had thought it had eliminated. They were something new, something dangerous, and something that had apparently been designed specifically to be the Empire's nemesis. The war had already begun. The only question now was whether the Empire could survive it. The mining colony of 442B had never seen a human before the day everything changed. Located in the Outer Rim territories, it served as one of the Empire's many resource extraction sites, populated by a mixture of conquered species who worked the dangerous mines under Imperial supervision. The colony's administrator, a cold-eyed named Sector Commander, had ruled with typical Imperial efficiency. Work quotas were non-negotiable, dissent was punished severely, and the native populations knew their place in the Empire's hierarchy. That morning started like any other, with the deep thrumming of mining equipment echoing through the settlement's underground tunnels. A young whose blue-scaled people had been conquered 50 years earlier was working his shift in the deepest sections when the first tremors shook the walls. "Cave in," someone shouted, and the miners began their practiced emergency evacuation procedures. But as they reached the surface, what they saw wasn't a geological disaster. 3 ships hung in the sky above the colony, their dark hulls seeming to absorb the light from its red dwarf star. These weren't Imperial vessels. Every miner knew the aggressive, angular designs of Imperial warships. These craft were different, sleek, organic-looking with hull patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living tissue. Most unsettling of all, the ships made no sound despite their massive size. Sector Commander emerged from the administrative complex, flanked by a squad of Imperial security forces. His cybernetic implants allowed him to communicate directly with orbital defense platforms, but when he tried to raise them, he received only static. "Attention unknown vessels," he broadcast through the colony's external communications array. "You are in violation of Imperial space. Identify yourselves immediately or face destruction." The response came not as a transmission, but as a figure materializing in the colony's central plaza. The teleportation technology was beyond anything the miners had ever witnessed, not the crude beam-downs used by Imperial shuttles, but something that seemed to fold space itself. The being that appeared was clearly human in origin, but modified in ways that easy description. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, with skin that had a subtle metallic sheen and hair that seemed to move with its own internal energy. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies that the different species present could all understand simultaneously. "I am Commander Sarah of the Terran Liberation Fleet," she announced, her electric blue eyes scanning the assembled crowd. "We have come to offer you a choice that the Galactic Empire has never given you: freedom." Sector Commander stepped forward, his hand moving to the plasma sidearm at his hip. "This colony is under Imperial protection. You will withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Sarah smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both gentle and terrifying. "Commander, isn't it? I've read your file. 47 years of service, responsible for the pacification of 6 different species, personally ordered the execution of over 3,000 dissidents. Tell me, do you really think these people consider your presence protection?" This hand completed its movement to his weapon, but before he could draw it, his entire security squad simply collapsed. They weren't dead. Their chests still rose and fell with steady breathing, but they lay motionless as if their nervous systems had been temporarily disconnected. "Agents," explained casually, as if discussing the weather. "Completely harmless, but they disrupt the electrical activity in combat implants and tactical equipment. Your soldiers will wake up in a few hours with nothing worse than mild headaches." Found himself stepping forward, driven by a mixture of curiosity and desperate hope. "What kind of choice?" he asked, his translator collar converting his native into standard Imperial. Turned her attention to the young miner, and her expression softened. The choice to determine your own destiny. For too long, your people and dozens of others have been forced to serve an empire that sees you only as resources to be exploited. We offer an alternative. She gestured, and the air above the plaza shimmered with holographic images. The miners gasped as they saw fleets of ships unlike anything in Imperial databases, massive space stations that seemed to grow like coral reefs, and most shocking of all, representatives from dozens of species working together as equals. This is the Terran Collective, continued. A coalition of free peoples dedicated to ending Imperial oppression throughout the galaxy. We've spent the last 3 centuries developing the technology and alliances necessary to give every species the chance to choose its own path. Sector Commander had managed to activate his personal emergency beacon, but seemed unconcerned. Your distress signal is being transmitted, Commander, but I'm afraid help isn't coming. The Imperial garrison in this sector has been offered the same choice we're extending here. Many of them have chosen to lay down their arms. One of the older miners, a grizzled named, pushed through the crowd. You say you offer freedom, but how do we know you're not just another group of conquerors? How do we know you won't just replace the Empire with something equally oppressive? Nodded approvingly. A wise question, let me show you something. She touched a device on her wrist, and suddenly the minds of everyone in the plaza were filled with information. Not forced into them, but offered, like a vast library they could choose to explore. They saw the history of the Terran Collective, the democratic councils that governed it, the technologies freely shared among member species, and most importantly, the absolute commitment to voluntary association. No one is forced to join, explained as the mental connection faded. Those who choose to remain neutral are free to do so. Those who wish to continue serving the Empire may leave unharmed, but for those who want something better, we offer partnership, not subjugation. Felt his heart racing. Everything he was seeing contradicted decades of Imperial propaganda about the natural order of galactic civilization. What about our families, our homes? We can't just abandon everything. You wouldn't have to, assured him. The collective believes in gradual transition, not forced displacement. Those who choose to join us can begin by simply refusing to serve Imperial interests. We provide protection, resources, and support for building new societies based on cooperation rather than domination. Commander had been growing increasingly agitated during this exchange. Lies, he shouted. The Empire has brought order to the galaxy. Before Imperial rule, these species were trapped in endless primitive conflicts. Turned back to him, her expression now cold as space. Commander, your people said the same thing about Earth 300 years ago. You claimed you were bringing civilization to a backward world. Then you sterilized our planet and tried to eliminate our entire species. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled miners. Most had never heard the full story of what had happened to humanity, only vague references to an extinct species that had resisted Imperial authority. But we survived, continued, her voice gaining intensity. We fled to the dark spaces between stars and spent 3 centuries becoming something the Empire could never defeat. We learned to merge organic evolution with technological advancement. We developed new forms of consciousness that allow thousands of minds to work in perfect harmony. And most importantly, we never forgot that the galaxy deserves better than Imperial tyranny. She gestured again, and new images filled the air above them. These showed the recent rebellions across Imperial space, but from a different perspective than the propaganda broadcasts the miners usually received. They saw Imperial forces retreating from world after world, not because they were overwhelmed by superior numbers, but because entire populations were simply refusing to cooperate with Imperial authority. This is what real power looks like, explained. Not the ability to destroy, but the ability to create something worth fighting for. When people have genuine alternatives, they don't choose oppression. Stepped forward again. What do you need from us? Nothing more than what you're willing to give, replied. If you choose to join the collective, we ask only that you help others discover the same freedom you've found. Share our technologies, teach others that they have choices, build something better than what you're leaving behind. And if we refuse? Then you refuse. We won't force anyone to accept our help, but we also won't allow the Empire to punish you for considering it. As if summoned by her words, The distinctive whine of approaching Imperial vessels filled the air. A squadron of fighters streaked overhead, followed by a heavy transport carrying reinforcement troops. Commander smiled triumphantly. "Your protection is about to be tested, human." Seemed completely unconcerned. "Actually, Commander, this is perfect timing. Your people need to see what they're really choosing between." The Imperial fighters began their attack runs, plasma cannons charging with deadly energy. But as they opened fire, their bolts struck invisible barriers surrounding the human ships and simply dissipated harmlessly. The fighters themselves began experiencing system failures, not explosive destruction, but simple mechanical breakdowns that forced them to land safely in the desert beyond the colony. The transport ship suffered a similar fate. Its engines failed gradually, allowing it to set down without injury to its crew, but leaving it completely disabled. "Warfare," explained to the watching miners. "We can disable any technology based on Imperial designs without harming the operators. Your weapons, your ships, your communication systems, all of them become useless in our presence." Commander's face had gone pale beneath his scales. "Impossible. Our technology is protected against biological attack." "Protected against conventional biological attack," corrected. "But we've had 3 centuries to study your defenses and develop completely new approaches. Every circuit in your equipment is vulnerable to targeted molecular disruption." The demonstration was having exactly the effect it hoped for. The miners watched in amazement as the seemingly invincible Imperial forces were neutralized without a single shot being fired in return. More importantly, they could see that the human technology was being used defensively, to protect rather than destroy. Found himself making a decision that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. "I want to join," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the plaza. "I want to be part of building something better." One by one, other miners began stepping forward. Not all of them. Some were too frightened, others too loyal to the only system they had ever known. But enough to make it clear that the Empire's control over this world was broken forever. Smiled, and for the first time it was an expression of pure joy rather than calculated intimidation. "Welcome to the future," she said. "Welcome to freedom." As the human ships began landing in the colony's expanded plaza, their hulls shifting and adapting to create temporary habitat modules, felt something he had never experienced before. Hope. Not just for himself, but for his children, for his species, and for all the countless beings across the galaxy who had never been given a real choice about their destiny. The Galactic Empire had built itself on the principle that some species were naturally superior to others. That order could only be maintained through force, and that resistance was futile. But watching the humans work alongside beings from dozens of different worlds, sharing technology and knowledge freely, began to understand that everything the Empire had taught him was a lie. The revolution wasn't just about changing who held power. It was about changing the very nature of power itself, replacing domination with cooperation, fear with trust, and ancient hatreds with new possibilities. And for the first time in generations, the future seemed bright with promise rather than dark with oppression. The war room aboard Empress' personal flagship, the Imperial Fist, had become a nightmare of cascading failure reports and desperate contingency plans. Admiral stood before the massive tactical display, watching in real time as red zones indicating lost territories spread across the galaxy like a plague. In the past 72 hours, the situation had deteriorated beyond anyone's worst-case projections. "Status report," Emperor commanded as he entered the chamber. Despite his of experience, even he couldn't hide the strain that recent events had placed upon him. Grand Admiral stepped forward, his scaled features grim. "Your Majesty, we've lost contact with 43 sector commands. The human fleet has appeared in over 200 star systems simultaneously. Our conventional naval responses have been completely ineffective." "Define ineffective," the Emperor said coldly. "Our ships can't engage them in direct combat," Admiral reported, her multiple arms working frantically over her control interfaces. "Their weapons disable our vessels before we can fire a single shot. When our fleets arrive at contested systems, they find their own equipment turned against them." Minister looked up from his analysis station, his cybernetic implants flickering with data streams. "Your Majesty, I've completed my preliminary assessment of their technology. What we're facing is beyond anything in our theoretical frameworks." They've achieved true symbiosis between organic and artificial intelligence, allowing their technology to evolve in real time during combat situations. Explain. Their ships aren't just built, they're grown. Each vessel is essentially a massive cybernetic organism capable of adapting to any threat we present. When we fire plasma weapons, their hulls develop plasma-resistant properties within minutes. When we attempt electronic warfare, their consciousness networks simply route around our attacks. Emperor studied the tactical display, his ancient mind racing through possibilities. What about their numbers? How many ships are we actually facing? That's the most disturbing part, replied. Based on our sensor analysis, they don't appear to have significantly more vessels than our intelligence initially estimated. Perhaps a few thousand ships total, but each ship seems capable of being in multiple places simultaneously. That's impossible. Minister cleared his throat nervously. Actually, Your Majesty, it might not be. We're detecting quantum entanglement signatures around their vessels. They may have developed some form of consciousness transfer technology that allows a single ship's artificial intelligence to control multiple hulls across vast distances. The implications were staggering. If the humans had truly mastered quantum consciousness transfer, then their effective fleet strength was limited only by how quickly they could manufacture new vessels. Worse, it meant that destroying individual ships might not actually eliminate their combat capability. What about the diplomatic outreach? The Emperor asked. Ambassador rose from his position at the communications console, his aquatic features showing clear signs of stress. Your Majesty, we've been attempting to establish formal negotiations for the past 18 hours. The humans have agreed to meet, but their conditions are problematic. Which are? They insist that any negotiations must include representatives from all the species currently in rebellion against the Empire. They want to discuss not just an end to hostilities, but a complete restructuring of galactic governance. Emperor's expression darkened. They want us to negotiate with our own subjects as equals. Worse than that, continued. They want us to acknowledge that our subjects have the right to choose their own governmental systems. In effect, they're demanding that we voluntarily dissolve the Empire. The war room fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems and the soft chirping of status alerts. For the Galactic Empire had been built on the principle of absolute imperial authority. The idea of treating conquered species as equal partners was not just politically impossible, it was philosophically incomprehensible to most of the leadership present. Options, the Emperor commanded. General Vex stepped forward, his reptilian features set in determined lines. Military option. We concentrate our remaining loyal forces and attempt to retake one of the core human strongholds. If we can capture their technology or leadership, we might be able to develop countermeasures. Intelligence indicates they've established major bases in the system and several locations in the cluster, Admiral added. But Your Majesty, our previous attempts to engage them directly have resulted in complete losses. We've lost 7 full battle groups without inflicting any confirmed damage on their forces. What about orbital bombardment of rebellious worlds? General Vex suggested. If we can't engage their fleets directly, we could threaten the populations they claim to be protecting. Minister shook his head. General, our intelligence suggests that approach would be counterproductive. The humans have developed planetary shield technologies that make our orbital weapons ineffective. More importantly, attacking civilian populations would likely drive more neutral species into active rebellion. Ambassador leaned forward. Your Majesty, there is one other option we haven't discussed. What if we actually consider their terms? The suggestion hit the assembled leadership like a physical blow. Several officers began speaking at once, their voices rising in outrage at the very idea of negotiating with rebels. Emperor raised a hand, and instant silence filled the chamber. Continue, Ambassador. Your Majesty, the Empire has always been pragmatic above all else. When we encounter a superior force, we adapt. When we face technological advancement beyond our capabilities, we find ways to benefit from it rather than simply opposing it. You're suggesting surrender. I'm suggesting evolution, replied carefully. The humans claim they don't want to destroy the Empire, only to transform it into something more democratic. What if we could find a way to maintain imperial influence within a restructured galactic government? General Vex snarled, his frustration boiling over. Ambassador, you're talking about abandoning everything the Empire stands for? Our ancestors conquered this galaxy through superior strength and will. We don't negotiate with our subjects. Our ancestors also knew when to be pragmatic, shot back. The Empire eventually allied with the Assembly rather than fight a war that would have destroyed both civilizations. Sometimes the wise choice is to find a new form of strength. Emperor studied the tactical display for a long moment. The red zones of rebellion now covered nearly a third of Imperial space, and more systems were falling every hour. Perhaps more concerning, reports were coming in of Imperial forces simply laying down their arms rather than fighting. Entire garrisons were choosing to join the rebellion rather than continue defending an increasingly hopeless cause. Minister, the Emperor said finally, in your scientific opinion, do we have any chance of developing effective countermeasures to their technology? The elderly was quiet for a long moment, his cybernetic implants processing vast amounts of data. Your Majesty, based on what I've observed, they appear to be several centuries ahead of us in multiple scientific fields. Even if we devoted our entire research capacity to the problem, it would likely take decades to close the gap. And that's assuming they don't continue advancing their own capabilities during that time. And their numbers, growing rapidly. Intelligence suggests they're not just recruiting from existing rebel populations. They're actually teaching other species how to modify their own technology using human principles. In effect, they're creating a galaxy-wide network of technologically enhanced civilizations, all working together against us. The strategic picture was becoming clear, and it was utterly hopeless from a conventional military perspective. The humans had not just survived their apparent extinction 3 centuries ago, they had used that time to become something that the Empire was fundamentally incapable of defeating. Admiral, the Emperor said, contact the human fleet, arrange for a diplomatic meeting. Your Majesty, General Vex protested, surely we haven't exhausted all military options. What about the Weapons Research Division? What about our classified projects? General, our classified projects have been in development for decades without producing anything that could match what the humans achieved centuries ago. We're fighting an enemy that has evolved beyond our ability to comprehend. Emperor moved to the chamber's main viewport, staring out at the stars that had once represented an empire under his absolute control. The truth is, we never actually defeated humanity 300 years ago. We simply taught them that they needed to become something stronger than us in order to survive. And now they're back, Admiral said quietly. Now they're back, the Emperor agreed, and they've brought friends. The communication console chimed with an incoming transmission. Ambassador looked up from his station, his expression showing surprise. Your Majesty, we're receiving a direct communication from the human fleet. They're requesting permission to send a diplomatic team to our location. How did they know we were preparing to contact them? Unknown, Your Majesty, but they're offering to meet wherever and however we prefer. They claim to have no intention of harming anyone who genuinely wants to discuss peaceful resolution. Emperor considered the offer. Meeting with the humans would be an acknowledgement that they were equals rather than subjects. It would represent a fundamental shift in the nature of imperial authority. But the alternative was watching his empire tear itself apart in a war it could not win. Tell them we'll meet, he decided, but I want full diplomatic immunity guaranteed for our delegation. Your Majesty, said carefully, they're asking for one additional condition. Which is? They want the meeting to be broadcast across the galaxy. They claim that the populations of all worlds deserve to hear what's being discussed about their futures. The request was audacious, but it also revealed something important about human strategy. They weren't just fighting for military victory, they were fighting for the hearts and minds of every species in the galaxy. By making the negotiations public, they would force the Empire to defend its policies in front of the very populations it ruled. Agreed, Emperor said finally. If we're going to negotiate the future of galactic civilization, then everyone should witness it. As the diplomatic arrangements began taking shape, Admiral found herself wondering what kind of beings the humans had become during their 3 centuries of exile. What did 300 years of preparation for this moment actually produce? And most importantly, when the Emperor sat down across from the human leadership, would he be negotiating with the same species the Empire had once tried to eliminate? or with something entirely new that humanity had evolved into? The answers to those questions would determine whether the Galactic Empire would survive in some form, or whether the humans' return would mark the end of an era that had lasted for over two. Either way, the galaxy was about to change forever. The neutral space station Harmony's Gate had been chosen as the site for the most important diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Built centuries ago by the long-vanished precursors, it existed in a sector that belonged to no current government, making it symbolically appropriate for discussions about the future of imperial rule. As Empress delegation approached the ancient structure, they could see dozens of other vessels already docked, representatives from nearly every species in the galaxy, both those loyal to the Empire and those in rebellion. The station itself was a marvel of precursor engineering, its crystalline walls seeming to grow organically from a central hub, creating chambers that could adapt their environment to suit any known species. Most impressive of all, its communication systems were capable of broadcasting across the entire galaxy simultaneously, ensuring that every world would witness whatever transpired here. Emperor stood in the airlock of his personal shuttle, flanked by Admiral, Ambassador, and a carefully selected team of advisors. Despite his experience with diplomatic functions, he felt an unfamiliar tension. For the first time in his reign, he was entering negotiations not as the supreme authority in the galaxy, but as one leader among many. "Your Majesty," Admiral said quietly, "our security scans of the station show some unusual readings. The human ships have somehow modified sections of the structure using their organic technology." "Modified how?" "It appears they've enhanced the station's translation and communication systems. Every word spoken in the main chamber will be automatically converted into the native languages of all attending species, and the broadcasts will include cultural context notes to ensure proper understanding." Emperor nodded grimly. Even in choosing the meeting location, the humans had demonstrated their technological superiority and their commitment to including every voice in galactic governance. It was a subtle but clear message about the kind of future they envisioned. The shuttle docked with a barely perceptible vibration, and the airlock cycled open to reveal a corridor lined with representatives from across known space. Emperor recognized leaders from species he had conquered decades ago, now standing as equals rather than subjects. The psychological impact was precisely what the humans had intended. At the end of the corridor waited a figure that made the Emperor pause. The being was clearly human in origin, but like the others he had encountered, modified in ways that transcended simple biological enhancement. This one appeared male, tall and lean, with skin that held a subtle luminescence and eyes that seemed to contain swirling galaxies. Most unsettling of all, there was an aura of calm authority around him that reminded uncomfortably of his own presence. "Your Imperial Majesty," the human said, his voice carrying harmonics that conveyed respect without subservience. "I am director of the Terran Collective. Thank you for agreeing to meet." Studied the human carefully. Like the others, this one bore the surname, suggesting some form of shared identity or collective consciousness among their leadership. "Director, I confess curiosity about how you've managed to coordinate this gathering so quickly." Smiled, an expression that was both genuinely warm and somehow otherworldly. When you've spent 3 centuries preparing for a single conversation, efficiency becomes second nature. Please, the main chamber awaits. They walked together through corridors that adjusted their lighting and atmosphere to accommodate the mixed group of delegates. As they moved, spoke casually, but sensed that every word was carefully chosen. "I should mention, Your Majesty, that this meeting includes representatives from several species that aren't currently part of your empire. We felt it important that all galactic civilizations have a voice in determining their collective future." "Species not part of the empire. I wasn't aware any significant populations had managed to avoid imperial contact." "Oh, they haven't avoided contact," replied. "They've simply been hiding in the spaces between your territories, building their own societies while staying beneath imperial notice. You'd be surprised how many thriving civilizations exist in the regions your maps mark as empty space." The revelation was startling, but somehow not surprising. If humanity had managed to survive and evolve for 3 centuries without imperial detection, other species might have accomplished the same feat. The galaxy was apparently much more populous and politically complex than Imperial authorities had realized. They entered the main chamber, and Emperor felt his breath catch. The space was enormous, its crystalline walls stretching upward into a cathedral-like dome that seemed to contain actual stars. Arranged in concentric circles were hundreds of delegates representing every known species and several that didn't recognize. At the center of the arrangement was a simple circular table with seats for the primary negotiators. As took his place, he noticed that the seating arrangement was carefully balanced. Representatives from species loyal to the Empire sat across from those in active rebellion, with the mysterious hidden civilizations forming a neutral buffer between them. The humans had positioned themselves not as the leaders of the gathering, but as facilitators. "Citizens of the galaxy," Director began, his voice somehow reaching every being in the chamber despite the vast space and the fact that he wasn't shouting. "We gather today to discuss the future of galactic civilization. For too long, that future has been determined by force rather than choice. Today, we have the opportunity to change that." Emperor stood, his own voice amplified by the station's modified systems. "I represent an empire that has brought order and stability to this galaxy for over two. While our methods may sometimes seem harsh, they have prevented the chaos and conflict that plagued earlier eras." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. Many had never heard the imperial perspective stated so directly, while others had never imagined they would see an emperor forced to justify his rule in front of his own subjects. Nodded respectfully. "Your Majesty speaks of order and stability, and these are indeed valuable goals. But we must ask, order for whom? Stability for what purpose? The Terran Collective has observed your empire for 3 centuries, and while it has indeed prevented some forms of conflict, it has created others. Such as the complete suppression of technological and cultural development among conquered species, the destruction of entire civilizations that refuse to submit, the reduction of sentient beings to mere resources for imperial expansion." His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. "Your empire has created stability through stagnation, order through oppression." Emperor felt anger rising but controlled it. "And what alternative do you propose? Without central authority, the galaxy would descend into endless warfare between competing species." "Would it?" gestured, and the chamber's walls came alive with holographic displays. "Let me show you what we've built during our exile." The images that filled the space around them were breathtaking. Vast space stations that seemed to grow like coral reefs, their organic curves housing populations from dozens of different species. Fleets of ships working together despite representing civilizations that had never met before the human intervention. Most remarkable of all, worlds that had been transformed from barren rocks into thriving ecosystems through the application of technologies that seemed to border on magic. "This is the Collective," explained. "Not a government in the traditional sense, but a network of free associations. Each species maintains its own cultural identity and political systems, but they cooperate on projects that benefit everyone. No one is forced to participate, but most choose to because the benefits of cooperation far outweigh the costs of isolation." A representative from the assembly stood up, her translucent wings twitching with agitation. "These images could be fabricated. How do we know this supposed collective actually exists?" Smiled, "An excellent question. Perhaps we should ask someone who's experienced it directly." The chamber's communication systems activated, and suddenly they were connected to real-time feeds from across the galaxy. Beings from dozens of species to their experiences with the collective, describing lives of unprecedented freedom and prosperity. Former imperial subjects spoke of technologies that had revolutionized their societies, of educational opportunities that had unlocked potential they never knew they possessed. Emperor watched the testimonies with growing unease. These weren't the carefully scripted propaganda broadcasts that imperial media produced. These were clearly spontaneous, genuine expressions of gratitude and hope. "Your Majesty," Director said gently, "we don't want to destroy the Empire. We want to transform it into something that serves all galactic citizens rather than just those at the top of the hierarchy. And if I refuse, if the Empire chooses to fight rather than submit to this transformation." His expression grew sad. "Then the galaxy will be forced to defend itself against imperial aggression. We've demonstrated that your military forces cannot stand against our technology, and more importantly, your own populations are choosing to join our cause rather than fight for a system that oppresses them." As if to emphasize his point, alerts began flashing on communication panels throughout the chamber. Admiral looked up from her mobile command interface, her multiple eyes wide with shock. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "I'm receiving reports from across Imperial space. 17 more sector commands have declared independence in the past hour. Our own garrison forces are refusing orders to suppress civilian demonstrations." The weight of inevitability settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. Emperor realized that this wasn't really a negotiation about whether the Empire would change. It was a discussion of how that change would occur. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Activated another series of displays, these showing detailed governmental structures and legal frameworks. A federated galactic government with representatives from every species chosen by their own populations. Shared technology and resources distributed based on need rather than conquest. Individual worlds maintaining their own cultures and laws while cooperating on interstellar issues. And the current Imperial leadership would maintain positions of authority appropriate to their experience and expertise, but accountable to the populations they serve rather than ruling through force. Emperor studied the proposed structure carefully. It was elegant, comprehensive, and probably workable. It was also the complete opposite of everything the Empire had represented for two. "This is surrender," he said finally. "This is evolution," replied. "Your Majesty, humanity learned a hard lesson 3 centuries ago. We discovered that no civilization, no matter how powerful, can survive by dominating others. True strength comes from building partnerships, from creating systems that benefit everyone rather than serving only the rulers." The Emperor looked around the chamber at the hundreds of representatives watching their exchange. For the first time in his reign, he could see his empire through their eyes, not as a source of order and protection, but as a system of oppression that had outlived whatever usefulness it might once have had. "If I agree to this transformation," he said slowly, "what guarantees do I have that the new government will honor its commitments? What prevents it from simply becoming another form of tyranny?" Nodded as if he had been expecting this question. "The same thing that has kept the collective free for 3 centuries, the absolute commitment to voluntary association. Any member species that becomes dissatisfied with the Federation can withdraw at any time. Any leader who attempts to accumulate inappropriate power can be removed by the populations they serve." "You're describing anarchy." "We're describing democracy," corrected. "The kind of democracy that becomes possible when every citizen has access to the information and education necessary to make informed choices about their government." Emperor was quiet for a long moment, his ancient mind wrestling with concepts that challenged everything he had believed about the nature of leadership and authority. Finally, he spoke. "I need to consult with my advisors." "Of course, but Your Majesty, while you deliberate, the galaxy continues to change around us. Every hour that passes, more worlds choose freedom over imperial rule. The question isn't whether this transformation will occur, but whether you'll help guide it toward a peaceful resolution." As the recess was declared and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Emperor remained seated, staring at the holographic displays that showed the collective's achievements. Despite himself, he was impressed by what humanity had built during their exile. Perhaps more importantly, he was forced to admit that their approach appeared to work better than imperial methods at achieving the goals he claimed to value most: peace, prosperity, and progress. The empire was ending. The only question now was whether its conclusion would be violent or voluntary, destructive or transformative. For the first time in his of rule, Emperor found himself genuinely uncertain about what choice would best serve the galaxy he had once controlled absolutely. The future had arrived, and it looked nothing like the past.